Answer these three questions honestly. What did you do last Tuesday? What did you do in October? And what happened to the last 10 years of your life? If those got harder to answer, not easier, that's the whole video right there. Because everyone knows the feeling. Summers used to last forever. A single school year felt like a geological age. And now, you blink and it's December again. You do the math on something that felt recent, and it was 6 years ago. Everyone feels this. Everyone. And you've probably been told why. Maybe you've heard it's because a year is a smaller fraction of your life now. Maybe you saw the article about your eyes moving slower, so your brain processes fewer images. Those explanations are everywhere. And here's the thing. They're mostly wrong. Not slightly incomplete, actually contradicted by the data. And the real answer is stranger. And honestly, kind of beautiful. Because it says something surprising about what your life is even made of. But before any of that, there's a bigger problem. Because when scientists actually went and measured this feeling, they found something nobody expected. Time might not be speeding up at all. Let's start there, because it breaks the whole question open. In 2005, a researcher named Mark Whitman and his colleague Sandra Lenhoff surveyed nearly 500 people aged 14 to 94. And they didn't just ask, does time feel fast? They got specific. They asked, how fast did today go? How fast did the last week go? The last month? The last year? And then, how fast did the last 10 years go? And the results are genuinely strange. For a day, a week, a month, everyone said time went quickly. Teenagers, 40-year-olds, 90-year-olds, no real difference. Age barely mattered. Even the last year showed almost nothing. But the last 10 years? That's where the whole effect lived. That's where older people said overwhelmingly that time had flown. Then a bigger study, William Friedman and Steve Jansen, almost 1,900 people across 2 countries, found exactly the same split. Their conclusion, in plain language, contrary to what everybody believes, the age differences in how fast time feels were very small, except for that one question about the last 10 years. And it gets weirder. Another team tracked young adults and older adults through daily life, pinging them to ask how fast time was passing right now. Both groups agreed with the statement that time speeds up as you get older. Both groups believed it, and neither group actually showed it in the moment. So sit with that. The feeling isn't happening to you now. Your Tuesday afternoon doesn't move faster than a teenager's Tuesday afternoon. The speeding up only exists when you look backwards, which means this was never a story about perception. It's a story about memory. Okay, but before we get to what's really going on, let's deal with the 2 explanations you've almost certainly heard, because they're wrong, and understanding why is what unlocks the real answer. Explanation number 1, the famous one, the proportion idea. It goes back to a French philosopher, Paul Janet, in 1877, and it sounds unbeatable. When you're 5, 1 year is 20% of your entire existence. It's enormous. When you're 50, that same year is 2%, a rounding error. So of course it feels shorter. It's a smaller slice of the pie. Elegant, intuitive, and it doesn't survive contact with the numbers. Because that theory makes hard predictions, and you can check them. It predicts that if you compare how time feels now versus when you were half your current age, it should feel about twice as fast. When researchers actually asked people, the answer came out closer to 1.5 times, nowhere near what the theory demands. It's off by a mile. And it fails a second time. Proportion should keep working forever. The older you get, the smaller each year becomes. So the acceleration should never stop. But that's not what happens. The feeling ramps up through your 30s and 40s, and then around 60, it plateaus. It levels off. A theory based purely on math has no explanation for why the math would suddenly stop mattering. And the killer problem? If it's really about proportion, It should apply to every stretch of time equally. Last year is a smaller fraction of your life too. So why does the last year feel normal, while the last decade feels stolen? Proportion can't answer that. Explanation number 2 is more recent, and it went absolutely everywhere. In 2019, an engineering professor at Duke, Adrian Bajan, published a paper arguing that as we age, our eyes move more slowly, our nerves get less efficient, and so we take in fewer mental images per second, fewer snapshots, so time feels like it's rushing past. It's a compelling image, and the headlines loved it. Scientists explain why time speeds up as you age. Here's what those headlines left out. That paper contained no new experiment. None. It was a theoretical argument, reasoning from physics, reviewing other people's findings. Nobody tested whether slower eye movements actually make a decade feel shorter. And researchers who study time perception for a living were not impressed. One cognitive scientist, Cindy Lustig at the University of Michigan, went after the core premise. The argument leans partly on signals traveling further in a larger body, and she pointed out, with some sarcasm, that you can judge for yourself whether an 80-year-old has a substantially bigger head than a 25-year-old. But there's a deeper flaw, and by now you can probably spot it yourself. That theory is about how fast you process the present moment. And we already know the present moment isn't the problem. Nobody's Tuesday is racing. If your brain were genuinely running at fewer frames per second, everything would feel fast. This hour, this week, this year. Instead, only the last decade got compressed. A theory about perception cannot explain a problem that lives in memory. So what's actually happening? Here's the shift that makes it all click. You have two completely different ways of judging time, and they don't agree with each other. The first is how time feels while it's happening. The second is how long a period feels when you look back on it. And here's the trick. Those two run on totally different fuel. Looking backwards, your brain doesn't have a stopwatch. It can't replay a decade to see how long it took. So it does the only thing it can. It checks how much stuff is in there. How many distinct, retrievable events does this period contain? A stretch packed with memories reads as long. A stretch with almost nothing in it reads as barely anything at all. And that gives you what's sometimes called the holiday paradox. And once you see it, you'll notice it constantly. Think about a really good trip, a week somewhere new. While you're there, the time flies. You're absorbed, you're busy, you look up and it's already the last night. But afterwards, that week feels huge. You can walk through it day by day. It feels like a month. Now think about last November, an ordinary working month. While it was happening, it dragged. The slow afternoons, the same commute. But looking back on it now, it's gone. It's a smooth, blank surface. It might as well not have happened. Fast in the moment, long in memory. Slow in the moment, gone in memory. Exactly backwards. That's not a quirk. That's the mechanism. Because your brain stores memory around change. It marks boundaries, moments where something is different, where the pattern breaks. New place, new person, new job, first time. Those boundaries are the pegs your memories hang on. And a week that's identical to the week before it, which was identical to the week before that, generates almost no boundaries at all. So almost nothing survives. It's not that the time was bad. It's that there was nothing there for your memory to grip. Which explains something that's been sitting under this whole conversation. Why does childhood feel so enormous? There's one of the most reliable findings in all of memory research, and it's called the reminiscence bump. If you ask an older adult to freely recall the events of their life, the memories don't spread out evenly. They pile up dramatically in one window, roughly ages 10 to 30. That's where the density is, and it's obvious once you say it out loud. Look at what's in that window. Your first friendship that actually mattered. First time you traveled without your parents. First job. first love, first heartbreak, leaving home. Every single one is a boundary. Every one is a first. Your teens and 20s are the most novelty-dense years most people will ever live. You are constantly doing things you have never done before. So that period gets encoded in extraordinary detail. And then, adult life arrives. And adult life is good at routine. Same house, same job, same route, same faces, same 11 meals in rotation. That stability is often exactly what you wanted. It's not a failure. But your memory runs on difference, and you've stopped giving it any.
So the years stop generating pegs. And when you look back and ask, how long was that? Your brain reaches into that decade, finds 2 weddings and a house move, and reports back, not very long at all. That's the illusion. The decade didn't shrink. Your record of it did. And we all ran this experiment, together, whether we wanted to or not. In April 2020, a researcher named Ruth Ogden surveyed 600 people in the UK during lockdown, and the result was published in the journal PLOS ONE. Over 80% of them reported that their sense of time had distorted compared to normal, and it went both directions. For some, days crawled. For others, whole months vanished. What predicted it wasn't age or biology. It was how much you had to do, how stressed you were, and how satisfied you were with your social contact. Strip out the variety, the transitions, the people, the events, and time itself starts behaving strangely. That's the theory playing out in real time, on millions of people at once. And you probably remember it, that stretch where every day was identical. And afterwards, it collapsed into one long, shapeless blur you can barely reconstruct.
Now, I want to be honest with you, because there's a brand new twist here, and it complicates the neat version. There's a study from this year, from Whitman's group again, the same researcher who started this whole line of work, testing 120 people aged 20 to 91 across 3 countries. They set out to confirm the memory density idea directly, and the data pushed back. When they counted how many autobiographical memories people could actually recall, they found no link between that number and how fast the last decade felt. In fact, older participants described their memories as more vivid and meaningful, not fewer. So what did predict the feeling? Performance on cognitive tasks, especially the ability to take in and hold new information. In other words, it may be less about how many memories you've got and more about how well you're still making them. The researchers' own words were that the data proved them wrong, which I think is worth sitting with. This is a live scientific question. The memory story is clearly the right neighborhood, but the exact mechanism is still being argued over right now.
And anyone who tells you it's completely settled is selling you something cleaner than what exists.
So, what do you actually do with this? Here's what I find genuinely hopeful about it. If the years were vanishing because of proportion, or because your nerves were degrading, there'd be nothing to do. Those are just facts about being alive. But if the compression comes from the density of what's in there, that's not fixed. That's a variable. Every piece of this points the same direction. Novelty is the lever. Not dramatic novelty. You don't have to quit your job or move countries. Just difference. A route you haven't walked. A skill you're bad at. A conversation with someone who isn't in your usual 7. A weekend that doesn't look like the last 30 weekends. Each one plants a marker your memory can hold on to. And the honest caveat, nobody has run the definitive trial proving do more new things, feel like you lived longer. It's a strong inference from good science, not a prescription. But the logic is solid, and the cost of testing it on yourself is basically 0. There's also a quieter version of this that doesn't require doing anything new at all, just paying attention. Because encoding needs attention. A day you moved through on autopilot barely gets written down.
A day you actually noticed us, which means presence isn't only a nice idea, it's storage. So, Back to those 3 questions from the start. Time is not speeding up. Your Tuesday is exactly as long as a 15-year-old's Tuesday. The clock never changed. What changed is how much of it you're keeping. You are not running out of time faster than you used to. You're running out of landmarks. And that's a very different problem, because that one has an answer. Every unfamiliar thing you do, every routine you break, every moment you actually pay attention to instead of sleepwalking through, that's not just a nice day. That's you writing something down. That's you refusing to let a year go by that you can't find afterwards. The years that felt endless when you were young weren't longer. They were just fuller. And the strange, slightly wonderful implication of all this is that the length of your life, as you'll actually experience it looking back, isn't measured in years at all. It's measured in how much of it you managed to keep. So the real question was never why life speeds up. It's what you're going to put in the next 10 years, so that when you look back, there's something there.